So Katie Van Dyke is the Chief Resilience Officer and Climate Action Program Manager at the City of Berkeley. She works to advance resilient and equitable solutions that prioritize the needs of frontline and historically marginalized communities, while bringing as many benefits as possible to the community. She recently led development of the Berkeley Existing Buildings Electrification Strategy, which provides a pathway for how Berkeley can equitably electrify its existing buildings as soon as possible. Welcome, Katie. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. I've been watching this retreat for many, many years, and it's such a really beautiful and informative space that you've created, Sean, and your team at Redwood Energy. So I'm really honored to be a part of it. So thanks so much for having me. And I'm also really excited and honored to follow my dear colleague, Ben, who is just wonderful and one of my favorite people to work with. So, and it was really great to hear all the exciting things coming down out of the Bambi program. So thanks so much, Ben, for sharing all of that. So as Sean mentioned, I am Katie Van Dyke. I use she, her pronouns. And I also want to note that I'm joined in the audience by my amazing colleague, Sarah Moore, who also does a lot of this work and helps me in putting together this presentation. So thanks, Sarah, in advance. And I'm here really to talk about an important topic of, what we in Berkeley are trying to do in considering renter protections as we move forward with our ambitious decarbonization policies. And I just want to say upfront that, and acknowledge that this is a very, very challenging and complex topic. And I do not consider myself an expert in this area, but we do prioritize this. This is a really important topic to myself and my team. And so we are really happy to share the things that we've learned so far as we have kind of gone down this journey of trying to figure out what more we can do, even though we haven't yet necessarily figured out all of the answers. Next slide. And so to start, I just wanted to share our vision of decarbonization. And so as we work towards this decarbonized clean energy future, our vision is really to be able to improve the lives of our community members without exacerbating the issues like displacement, gentrification, and increased costs, especially for our most vulnerable and historically marginalized communities. And I just wanted to give a quick shout out. I have some kind of artwork displayed out throughout my presentation, and it came from the Othering and Belonging Institute, and they did this Bridging and Belonging project and kind of created all these really beautiful and free images here. And so I just wanted to kind of give a shout out and encourage folks to check it out if you haven't already. Next slide. And so now, as some of you may know, Berkeley has many ambitious climate goals, and we're really fortunate to have both community and leadership in our city who advocate for taking strong climate action. Next slide. But at the same time, we know that climate change hits our frontline communities first and worst, and that these are the same communities who suffer the most from other socioeconomic disadvantages. And these are also the same communities who've been historically disinvested in through racist government policies like redlining. And so we know that as we develop our programs and policies towards decarbonization, we really need to prioritize the needs of those marginalized communities. And for us, that includes many communities, including renters and low and moderate income communities and communities of color, among others. Next slide. And so before I dive into some of the policies and programs we're working on, I just wanted to provide a little bit of context on our renter population in Berkeley, which is large, as you can imagine, due to the presence of many UC Berkeley students. And so this shows the population of Berkeley broke down by homeowners and renters. And as you can see, a majority of Berkeley residents, 57%, are renters, which is higher than our county of Alameda County. Next slide. And this next slide shows that there's a large discrepancy in home ownership versus renting in Berkeley, just based on the race of the people who live here. So there's a 43% home ownership rate for minority racial groups and Latinx households, compared to 51% for white households. Next slide. And this slide shows how renters make up a disproportionate majority, or 88% of the households who are categorized as extremely low income. And that means that they're making 30% or less of area median income. And so this just really highlights the need for us to prioritize this group in our policymaking. Next slide. And then just one final example of how renters are more vulnerable is that they're experiencing almost twice as much housing cost burden in Berkeley. And that means that their housing costs are greater than 30% of their gross income. And renters are experiencing 3 times as much of severe cost burden, which means that over 50% of gross income is spent on housing compared to homeowners. And so you can see here, renters have a higher cost burden in Berkeley than both the county and the Bay Area. Next slide. And all of these challenges for our renters are really exacerbated by the extreme housing crisis and risk of displacement that we're facing in Berkeley, as well as, in many other places. Okay, next slide. So now I'm going to transition to talk a little bit more about some of the challenges that we've learned as we've been trying to advance additional renter protections along with our decarbonization policies. And there are many, and while we don't have all the answers, we thought it would be helpful to kind of share these lessons that we've learned so that we can work all together to develop solutions to them. Next slide. Okay, so these are things that I'm sure will sound familiar to many of you. So we've heard, and similar to what Ben had talked about in his presentation, we've heard concerns from our renters that if units get upgraded, it could lead to increased rent, increased utility bill costs, and that could lead to displacement. Another concern that we've heard from renters is that many programs require income verification, and this is personal information that folks are not comfortable giving, and so they'd rather just not participate in a program, even though it might provide some benefits to them. And then another challenge that we've heard is that some of these upgrades can lead to temporary displacement of residents, where they have to move out for even a short period of time, but that can be really disruptive and really challenging for folks. So again, it's a deterrent. It makes folks not really want to participate in some of these programs. And so through all this, we've learned, similar to what Ben was saying, it's just really important to work directly with folks, with these residents, really listen and understand their needs and priorities, and lead with what the community needs are as we design our programs and policies. Okay, next slide. Another area of challenges that we've encountered relates to the reach of many of the rental buildings and also enforcement of these programs. And so again, similar to what Ben was saying, many programs have had challenges reaching these lower and moderate income rental units, including the unsubsidized affordable housing group, which is notoriously challenging to reach. And we've also heard that even though some programs may have requirements of renter protections in order to participate, for example, if you do this upgrade program, you have to keep the rent affordable for X number of years. There's oftentimes no enforcement of those rules. And so therefore they're not necessarily followed, no one's following up, and they don't really have any teeth. And so as a result of all of this, we've really thought about this and learned that, while Berkeley has a lot of renter protections already, which I'll show in a bit, there are gaps in who is protected. And so it's really important, and we have to be mindful to try to reach those folks. And we also have to recognize that enforcement of any renter protection requirements is key, especially for communities who may not have strong renter protections in their local jurisdiction. And so they're therefore relying on a program to have those enforcements. So we really just need to make sure that enforcement is part of the, the budget and the planning of the programs. Next slide. And then finally, no surprise, we know that there are several challenges related to getting property owners interested in participating in programs or to just upgrade their rental properties in general. One of the first major challenges is the split incentive. It's really hard to get people to pay for expensive building upgrades when the benefits are actually going to be enjoyed by someone else, by the renters. This is a huge challenge and just highlights the need to incentivize and partner with property owners. Another challenge is that we've seen many of the older low-rise rental properties who we want to reach are owned by smaller scale property owners who have fewer resources, less time. It's more challenging for them to make these types of upgrades. We've also heard that there's oftentimes a fear that a building may be found out to be out of compliance of other housing and building codes. And so property owners don't necessarily want to participate in programs which might identify these issues and require more work, more money. So they just decide not to participate. And then finally, we've found that for lower income rental units, these buildings do tend to have a lot of deferred maintenance, like health and safety upgrades and electrical system upgrades that need to be addressed. And this can lead to additional costs and challenges. And I'll have an example of that later. Okay, next slide. And so all this being said, I did want to highlight that Berkeley is actually really fortunate in that we have a lot of existing renter protections in the city already, many of which are listed here, and I won't go through all of these, but just to kind of provide some context of where we're coming from. Next slide. And then next, I'll discuss some of the recent projects that we're working at the city, which do consider renter protections. Next slide. And so this just gives a quick summary. So I'll go through each one of these in more detail. Next slide. And so the first program is really our Berkeley Existing Buildings Electrification Strategy, which was adopted in 2021. And this was work that we've been working on for several years. We really wanted to lead with equity on it. This was in the midst of the pandemic and the murder of George Floyd. And so we really wanted to elevate and lead with equity and the development of this strategy. And so as a result, our team developed a set of what we call equity guardrails, which is a minimum set of equity requirements that must be met in order for our electrification policies to move forward. And this was developed based on really targeted community input with disadvantaged communities. And one of the 4 guardrails is dedicated to promoting housing affordability and anti-displacement. And this is because this was a huge concern of our community. So this is something that we really want to make sure that we're addressing as we consider anything. We're not going to mandate anything until it can pass these guardrails, essentially. Next slide. And for the electrification strategy, we also changed our timing approach for this work as a result of the equity guardrails and as a result of the direct feedback that we heard from the community. We thought originally going in, it was going to be a very aggressive timeline saying everything has to be electrified by, yesterday. But based on the concerns that we had, based on the, current state of regulations and financing and funding that really just make full electrification out of reach for so many, we couldn't do that. And so what we did instead is we created a phased approach to this work, which really attempts to balance the urgency of the climate crisis by moving as quickly as we can on the things that can pass those guardrails in the short term, while taking some time to do additional work and ensure that this enormous task that we all have of electrifying all of our buildings can be done so equitably at scale. And so phase 1, which is kind of where we're at right now, really includes developing pilot programs and investing resources and funding into our low and moderate income communities. Next slide. And so an example of this phase 1 work that we're working on now is a $600,000 pilot climate equity fund, which was established by our city council in 2021 to provide climate change and resilience benefits to low income residents in both buildings and transportation. And so this program has 3 different program areas. The first is focusing on electrifying homes. The second is on electrifying mobility. And the third is on increasing community capacity by creating what we're calling a climate equity collaborative. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. And so this program area 1 really specifically will provide $250,000 to focus on building decarbonization improvements that enhance resilience, support occupants, and reduce greenhouse gas emissions for low-income residents. And we're still identifying which buildings will all be participating in this program, but one property that we know for certain will be included is a rental property that's owned by the Northern California Land Trust. And that's the building that you see here. And so I did want to dive into this project a little more to give a real life example of some of the challenges that we're seeing as, as we work to electrify an older rental building with a lot of deferred maintenance. So this property on 10th Street has 8 units. All of them are income qualified at 80% or less of area median income. And it's owned by the Northern California Land Trust, or NCLT. And NCLT is a nonprofit organization that uses a legal structure called a land lease, which contains restrictions on future sale prices. So this ensures lasting affordability for the residents. And the residents of of this property are they're primarily low-income elderly people of color, and they were facing potential eviction when the owners put the building up for sale in 2019, but they were able to organize and they were able to arrange so that NCLT purchased the building. And so NCLT is using several streams of funding right now to do a full renovation on the building. And the goal is that it would be all electric. This renovation will address health, safety, comfort, and climate improvements. And it'll allow these tenants, many of whom have been here for decades, to stay in their newly upgraded homes affordably without risk of displacement. So it's a really exciting project, and we're really, we're really happy to support it. And this property is also, located in an area of Berkeley with the highest percent of communities of color and low-income residents. It's an area that was historically redlined. It's now experiencing gentrification, and it also is an area of town that has the most climate impacts, including flooding, higher levels of pollution, and adverse health outcomes. So this property, though, requires extensive retrofits in order to address the deferred maintenance. And so many issues have come up as construction has started, as you can imagine, and it's been really challenging to have sufficient funds to make it all electric. So an example is the team discovered at one point that the balconies on the property were unsafe and they needed to be removed immediately for the, or otherwise it would jeopardize the Section 8 vouchers that need to go to pay for the rent of those units. And so this was an additional cost that was unforeseen, and it caused some last minute challenges in the permit applications. Another challenge is that they realized that some of the tenants may have to be relocated temporarily for some of the upgrades because there might be asbestos. So they're looking into that, but that's also, an unforeseen challenge that they were hoping would not be the case. There's also been challenges related to working with PG&E on the location of the meters, looking for space they're going to be installing a harvest thermal dual heat pump. There's leaky windows, unsafe stairs, and lots of other things going on. So we're working really closely with the NCLT team, and we're hopeful that we'll be able to make the building all electric, but just also say that it has been much more challenging to make the finances work than originally anticipated. Okay, next slide. Okay, and then another program that we're actively working on is a $1.5 million Just Transition residential electrification pilot. And so this program is similar to that climate equity pilot that I was just talking about with the home retrofits, and that the funds are intended to go towards electrification and retrofits of low and moderate income homes. However, this program specifically requires minimum labor standards, and the intent is to advance high road jobs and a diverse workforce. And so we're hopeful that this program will result in retrofits of rental units. We are excited that the RFP is now open. There's a link on this page, so please do share it with anyone who may be interested in applying. Proposals are due March 7th. But yeah, so we're really excited about this program and to see what the results will be. Okay, next slide. And then the next project is that Berkeley recently completed its housing element update, which is a plan to meet the housing needs of the community over the next 8 years. This plan provides a deep dive into the housing stock of Berkeley, and this is actually where I pulled most of my data on my earlier slides about rental properties and ownership. And it also highlights the existing renter protection programs in place and opportunities to look to in the future. Next slide. And then this is in 2019, Berkeley became the first city in the US to prohibit natural gas infrastructure and new construction. And so this means that all newly constructed rental units will be all electric. So that's one way that we're addressing the new rental units. Okay, next slide. And then in 2021, the American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy, or ACEEE, launched the Energy Equity for Renters initiative. And so for this program, the City of Berkeley partnered with our friends at Stop Waste and Bayren, including Ben, and we partnered also with several Berkeley community-based organizations, including our rent board, and we were selected to participate in this. And so ACEEE, as a result of this project, has produced a toolkit, which can be found at the link here. And I think Sarah put in the chat. Thanks, Sarah. And the toolkit offers guidance on how to integrate energy efficiency and affordable housing policy, thereby reducing greenhouse gas emissions and preserving or creating affordable housing. And there's going to be a webinar coming up on this in mid-March. So be on the lookout for more information around that. Okay, next slide. And so next steps. So in terms of next steps, we're focused on a few things. First is we are spending a lot of our staff time and resources to identify funding opportunities that will enable the projects and programs to directly benefit our disadvantaged communities. Examples are, we're really prioritizing our climate equity fund and just transition programs, which are really exciting pilots for us to work on. We're also working really hard to build trust in the community. It being a local government, it's not always the case that we're trusted for good reason. And so we're working to provide more education. We're conducting targeted engagement. And a great example is as part of the Climate Equity Fund, we're working with our partner, the Ecology Center, to develop a climate equity collaborative. And this is a community-led collaborative of community-based organizations representing disadvantaged communities. And we're hoping that all this work will help to cultivate some champions and partners in the community. And Ben talked about the movement generation spectrum of community engagement. That's also a framework that we follow and that we're trying to move on up. And so, ultimately our goal is that we can work with this collaborative and lean into co-creation of policies with our community. We also are working really hard to try and find partnerships with both renters and building owners in order to make all of this work. We recognize that we need to have both as partners. So time is a resource for owners. We need to bring them into the conversation and incentivize them if we want to get this work done. And we also need to get renters excited about the work. And an example is, NCLT has a really great relationship with the residents there. And in part that's, leading to the ability to do all the work that's going on there. We're also working to collaborate more with our housing department. We have experts over there who've been doing this work for a long time, and there's really great opportunities for us to collaborate and work well together. So we're doing a lot more of that. And then finally, we really just understand how challenging this work is. And we want to work together with all of you to advance more solutions. So we really look forward to collaborating with all of you and trying to find some great opportunities in the future to help protect our renters. So I think that's all for me. I think the next slide has my contact information. Please feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions, and I'm happy to answer any questions that I can now.
Woo! Thank you so much, Katie. So Martin Volker had a question for you, sort of a comment question. Regarding commercial owners, he's heard that most apartment complexes change owners around 11 years in, because that's the time period during which you can neglect the most major maintenance. Then they sell it, saddling the next owner with deferred maintenance. So this is an observation. And I understood that Berkeley was trying to have a point of sale ordinance or some sort of regulatory trigger for apartment complexes where they would have to increase efficiency. Can you speak a little bit about those issues?
Sure. Well, I don't know about the transitioning after 11 years, but that's a good anecdote. And in terms of the point of sale, so Berkeley has an emissions buildings emissions savings ordinance, which is really actually a time of listing ordinance. And there are, part of the BB strategy is to look into having requirements for buildings, but currently the regulation doesn't require any actual upgrades. And so right now we're in the process of looking at what that could look like, doing community outreach and engagement. And so that's something that's coming in the future, but again, it's not required at this point. And I might ask Sarah, who's in the audience, if she has any other comments, and maybe she could put that in the chat too.
Well, thank you. So the point of listing, and the point of listing, does it now have electrification requirements, or is that something to be implemented in the future?
It does not currently have any requirements. It's a requirement to get an energy assessment. And the idea was to really try and encourage people to get information and make the decisions that make most sense to them as they purchase a new home. But we're looking into what the next I guess chapter of the BASO program will look like, and there are plans to have requirements at some point, but that has not happened yet. And I see Sarah has popped on now, so I'll let her answer.
Oh, thanks so much. Yes, I think, Katie, you described it well. Hi, Sean. I will say that our assessments do include electrification readiness and give clarity about what the fuel is for the systems in the building to start. As Katie referenced, we are just starting a process, pulling together a technical advisory committee and other things, looking at, potentially requiring upgrades as well as the assessment. That's going to be centered on single family homes to start. But it is, one exciting thing that we're taking on this year.
Congratulations. I appreciate you starting the hard work. There were two questions here directed at Berkeley about how it wasn't going fast enough. And we all feel that here. But I was wondering, could you respond to the critique that Berkeley's not going fast enough? You're the leaders. You have to go faster.
Yeah, sure. We've heard members of our community, and again, I think that was the original way that we thought the strategy was going to go. It was just very, very, very aggressive, as fast as possible. But really, when we pivoted and shifted our approach to put equity first, our belief is that we have to all go together the right way in order to make this transition. If we go too fast, we are going to leave people behind. And those are the people that have already been left behind for so many other reasons. So we really have to get our ducks in a row. We have to get the kind of fundamental structures in place to support the people who cannot do this on their own before we require them to do that. And so I definitely, acknowledge that climate change is real. It is an emergency. It is something that we have to address as soon as possible. But we made the intentional decision here that we want to do it all together. And we want to do it in a way that will support everyone, especially those people who need more support. So I guess I don't know, Sarah, if you have anything else to say.
No, I think you said it well. I mean, we are also working towards it as quickly as possible, right? Acknowledging that there are people in our community who are able to move faster. And so we are sharing information and, rebates and opportunities and doing all of that as well. But then really tailoring support for those who need more support to get to that level as well.
The last question from Arlene Baxter. She points out that sadly only owners must get the assessment, the owner of the building. And she says, as a realtor, I really wanted the assessment done by the buyers, as they are the ones motivated to make the changes, and they would most benefit from the evaluation, but not so much the seller. Do you have any thoughts right now? Apparently you obligate the seller, but not the buyer. So any response to that critique?
So it is something that we do want information at time of listing, but there are also deferrals possible to buyer. We recognize that typically it is the buyer who's taking on work in terms of renovations and the like, and we do want them to have that information in place and be armed with the opportunities to make changes, including electrification.
One last comment, because we have one more minute. Tom Grayley, this is a critique. I apologize, but this is the public forum here. So Tom says, the Berkeley BESO, BESO, is a step backward from a previous program called RECO. RECO actually had teeth and required work being done. RECO was hated by the realtors. So can you talk a little bit about the transition from RECO to BESO?
So RECO was just a prescriptive list of things like insulate your water heater and the like. And there were a few different problems with it. We moved to BESO to really give more tailored information based on good building science, performance based. So it does a lot, and people do use these assessments. We are definitely seeing sort of people acting on them, voluntarily electrifying in some cases, and certainly doing energy efficiency upgrades. which of course continues to be promoted, right? We all know we want that envelope tight. You know, it was an intentional shift. And as we referenced, we're also looking at further strengthening that to get even more properties to make upgrades.
Thank you so much. Thank you. You guys are inspiring. Thank you for leading. Thank you for doing the hard work. I get it. Like that 8-unit development, what a hot mess. Thank you for doing all the hard work and helping people out. So, yay, good job.